I've been promising this video for a while, and here it finally is. Here's how to pronounce the final ED of regular past tense verbs. When we want to talk about completed actions in the past, we use the simple past tense. To get the past tense form of a regular verb, we add ed to the base verb. I walked all the way home. I believed it was true. I wanted to think about it. When we want to talk about things that we've done in a time period we're still in, like today, this week, or this year, or we want to talk about things that we've done recently, or things that are affecting the present, we use the present perfect tense. The present perfect tense is constructed by taking have or has and following it with the past participle of the main verb. How do you get the past participle of a verb? It's easy. If it's a regular verb, the past participle is the same as the simple past form. Laughed, lived, wanted. I've liked her since the first time I met her. I've just climbed 10 flights of stairs. We've just started. The past forms of verbs have other uses too. If you want to expand the number of adjectives in your vocabulary, you can use past participles as adjectives. It was a missed opportunity. I'd like a baked potato, please. He was too tired to get out of bed. He was the most wanted fugitive in the whole country. As you can see, the past forms of regular verbs are important building blocks in the English language, but many students of English struggle with how to pronounce them. Is it looked? Is it walked? No and no. There are 3 ways to pronounce these regular past tense and past participle forms, and how to choose which one of the 3 ways to use with which verb is easier than you think. So let's get to it. But hey, first let me give a quick disclaimer. These are the pronunciations in American English. In British English, you'll hear some irregular past forms that we don't often use in the New World. For example, they say burnt when we say burned, and they say spilt when we say spilled. Even though we use different past forms for those verbs in the US, you do still hear burnt and spilt used as adjectives here sometimes. So you might hear someone in the US talking about burnt toast or spilt milk. But then the British also say learnt, and you're just not ever going to hear that one in the US. Ever. For us, the past form of learn is learned. But sometimes you will hear learned. What? Yes, there are a handful of other adjectives that have the same spelling as the past form of some common regular verbs, but sometimes they get pronounced with an extra syllable. Aged, blessed, dogged. At least when learned is an adjective, it always has 2 syllables. With some of the others, that's not always the case. So you might hear someone talk about an aged man who likes to eat aged cheese. By comparison, the verbs that are irregular on both sides of the Atlantic are, ironically, usually much more regular. On either side of the ocean, the past form of send is sent. And yes, most verbs have the same irregularities in British English and in American English. There are just a handful of exceptions. They use got as the past participle of get, but we say gotten. And by extension, that also works with forget. The British use forgot as the past participle, but in the US, that's only the simple past form. For the past participle, we say forgotten. There, that's enough talk about irregular verbs and the other exceptions. Okay, now that we've got all that out of the way, let's get back on track and concentrate on the 3 ways to say the final ed of regular verbs in their past and past participle forms. So what are the 3 ways that the final ed of regular past tense verbs can be pronounced? T, D, id. Hey, that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the... No. No, I'm kidding. It's not quite that simple, but it's definitely still less complicated than you might think. So let's get going. Now first, to talk about this, we need to discuss some basic phonics, the science of sounds in language. Nothing too complex. It's not going to be too difficult or scary, I promise. After all, we're just going to be talking about regular verbs. Add one of those 3 endings, t, d, or id, to the base form of any regular verb, and voila! You've got the past tense form and the past participle form of that verb. There are a few semi-regular verbs that have some minor spelling changes when you write the past form, but that doesn't have any effect at all on how you say them. And let me make just one more disclaimer here. It's really hard to make a consonant sound in isolation without adding a vowel sound before it or after it. The third ending, id, is a complete syllable with a vowel sound and a consonant sound together. It's easy to say it exactly how it sounds when you use it in real life. Id, id, id. But the first two endings are really just consonant sounds that get added to the end of the base verb. So instead of saying ta and duh, I could just as easily say ti and di. I'm just trying to pick a relatively neutral vowel sound to use after the consonant sounds to show you how to say them. When you use these sounds to make the past forms of regular verbs in the real world, you should only add the consonant sound. Hoped, checked, forced, called, stayed, argued, balanced. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on. So to be able to decide which ending to use after which verbs, we need to understand that all sounds in English fall into one of two broad categories: voiced sounds and unvoiced sounds. Voiced sounds are the ones where you vibrate your vocal cords when you produce the sound. And as you might have already guessed, unvoiced sounds are the ones where you don't vibrate your vocal cords. So how does knowing that help us know when to use which sound after which verb? There are just 3 rules you need to know. Number 1, if a regular verb ends in an unvoiced consonant sound besides a T sound, you add a T sound. Number 2, if it ends in a voiced sound other than a D sound, you add a D sound. And number 3, if it ends in a T sound or a D sound, you add that extra syllable id. So which sounds are voiced and which are unvoiced? We'll go into more detail shortly. But first, here's something that's really, really easy to remember. All of the vowel sounds in English are voiced sounds. You always vibrate your vocal cords whenever you make any of the vowel sounds. Eerie, ooh, oh, a. I say, ah, a. Since all vowel sounds are voiced, if a regular verb ends in a vowel sound, you always add a D sound to get the past form. Try becomes tried. Okay, there's a spelling change there too. Free becomes freed. Flow flowed. Snow snowed. Play played. Fry becomes fried. Yeah, that's another spelling change. But it's just a spelling change. So remember, if a regular verb ends in a vowel sound, you add a D sound to get the past form. On the other hand, some consonant sounds are voiced and some are unvoiced. So now we'll go through all the consonant sounds of English, and I'll tell you which ones are voiced and which aren't. Once you understand that, you'll be well on your way to knowing exactly how to pronounce the past form of any regular verb. But first, the second easiest part of this. If the verb ends in a T sound or a D sound, that's when you add that extra syllable id. Want becomes wanted. End becomes ended. Decide, decided. Trade, traded. Last, lasted. Create, created. Hesitate, hesitated. Insist, insisted. Appreciate, appreciated. Differentiate, differentiated. Congratulate, congratulated. Accentuate, accentuated. Remember, if a regular verb ends in a T sound or a D sound, that's when you add that extra syllable id. And the opposite thing is easy too. Even if you don't remember anything else from this video, just remember this. If a verb doesn't end in a T sound or a D sound, you don't add that extra syllable. Never, ever. No exceptions. And again, the next level of complexity isn't too hard to grasp either. All vowel sounds are voiced. So if a regular verb ends in a vowel sound, you always add a D sound to get the past form. So now we have 2 things about this that are really simple. Only add that extra syllable id when the final sound of the base verb is a T sound or a D sound, like waited or ended. And if the base verb ends in a vowel sound, you follow it with a D sound. Cried, pursued, rescued. But now for those of you who really want to polish your English pronunciation, let's dig a little deeper. Let's talk about which consonant sounds are voiced and which are unvoiced. Once you've learned that, you'll know exactly how to pronounce the past form of any regular verb in English. Now it's time to get down to business. Let's talk about the voiceless consonant sounds. Remember, voiceless or unvoiced means that you don't vibrate your vocal cords when you make these sounds. If a verb ends in one of these unvoiced consonant sounds, you add a T sound to get the past form. So here are the unvoiced consonant sounds in English and examples of the past forms of some regular verbs that end in these voiceless consonant sounds. F as in laugh, which becomes laughed. K as in kick, which becomes kicked. P as in stop, which becomes stopped. S as in pass, which becomes passed. T is in wait. But remember, even though the T sound is voiced, if it ends in a T sound, we add that extra syllable id to get waited. H as in nothing. No, not the word nothing. What I mean is there aren't any verbs that end in an H sound. At least not any I know of. If you can think of a verb that ends in an H sound, let me know in the comments. Now there are verbs that end with the letter H, but it's either a silent H or the H forms part of a group of consonants that represent another unvoiced sound, such as sh, as in wish, which becomes wished, or this consonant sound ch, as in watch, which becomes watched. And there's one more unvoiced consonant sound in English, the unvoiced TH sound, as in nothing. And there I do mean the word nothing, but there are no verbs that end in the unvoiced TH sound. Well, again, not any that I know of. If you know one, leave me a comment. There are nouns that end in this sound, like mouth and breath. And there are verbs that come from the same root words, but verbs like mouth and breathe use the other TH sound, the voiced TH sound, so they get a D sound added to become mouthed and breathed. After that smooth transition, let's move on and talk about regular verbs that end in the other voiced consonant sounds in English. B as in grab, which becomes grabbed. Sob becomes sobbed. G as in beg, which becomes begged. Log becomes logged. J as in judge, which becomes judged. Lodge becomes lodged. The final L sound ul, as in call, which becomes called. Fill becomes filled. The final R sound r, as in fear, which becomes feared. Score becomes scored. V as in love, which becomes loved. Save becomes saved. Z as in realize, which becomes realized. Size becomes sized. And now the nasal consonants. When you say the nasal consonants, you send air out through your nose. We have 3 nasal consonants in English. Lots of languages have and n, but we also have ng. Remember, all 3 of the nasal consonants are always voiced. As in seam, which becomes seamed. Form becomes formed. As in clean, which becomes cleaned. Turn becomes turned. As in belong, which becomes belonged. String becomes stringed. And there are 2 voiced consonant sounds that aren't the final sound in any verbs I know of. W and y. If you can think of a verb that ends in w or y, you know the drill. Let me know in the comments. The final voiced consonant sound is the D sound, d, as in demand, which gets an extra syllable to become demanded. Sound becomes sounded. And there you go. That's it. So what have we learned? Let's summarize. If a regular verb ends in an unvoiced sound besides the T sound, the final ed is pronounced with a T sound. Mixed, wrapped, fished, slapped, forced, discussed, brushed, looked, danced, laughed, helped, punished, developed, promised. If a regular verb ends in a voiced sound other than a D sound, the final ed is pronounced as a D sound. Pulled, wondered, believed, begged, smiled, returned, seemed, changed, considered, happened, contained, sustained, retained, maintained. Also remember all the vowel sounds are voiced. So if a regular verb ends in a vowel sound, the final ed is pronounced as a D sound. Rescued, pursued, freed, played, borrowed, showed, tried, cried, fried, spied, chewed, brewed, screwed. And if a regular verb ends in a T sound or a D sound, the final ED is pronounced id. Included, shouted, sorted, landed, voted, wasted, graded, contacted, recommended, hesitated, decided, suggested, succeeded, investigated, interrupted, disregarded, adopted, adapted, attended, affected.
Adopted, adapted, attended, affected. Adopted, adapted, attended, affected.
We can talk about barbecued shrimp, boiled shrimp, broiled shrimp, baked, sauteed, pan-fried, deep-fried, stir-fried, air-fried. So you might hear someone talk about an aged man who likes to eat aged cheese. It was a simple furnished room at $8 per week. She had put aside as much as she could for months, but this was all she had managed to save. Della, being quite slender, had mastered this art. Suddenly she turned from the window and stood before the looking glass. With a brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she moved quickly out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign said, Mrs. Sofrony, hair goods of all kinds. Mrs. Sofrony, who was quite large, just looked at her coldly. It showed its value by substance alone. When Della arrived home, her intoxication gave way to prudence and reason. The door opened and Jim stepped in. His eyes were fixed on Della. There was an expression on his face that she could not read, and it terrified her. Jim seemed to quickly wake up from out of his trance. Della's slim and nimble fingers tore away at the string and pulled off the paper. Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down onto the couch and then put his hands behind his head and smiled. Harrison looked like a walking junkyard. In the race of life, Harrison carried 300 pounds. I am the Emperor, cried Harrison. He stamped his foot and the studio shook. Ballerinas, technicians, musicians, and announcers cowered on their knees before him, expecting to die. Harrison plucked the mental handicap from her ear, snapped off her physical handicaps with marvelous delicacy. Last of all, he removed her mask. They shifted their weights to their toes. Harrison placed his big hands on the girl's tiny waist, letting her sense the weightlessness that would soon be hers. They reeled, whirled, swiveled, flounced, capered, gambled, and spun. It was then that Diana Moon Glampers, the handicapper general, came into the studio with a double-barreled 10-gauge shotgun. She fired twice, and the Emperor and the Empress were dead before they hit the floor.
This is supposed to be a happy occasion. Let's not bicker and argue about who killed who.
In tonight's top story, Peter Piper has presumably picked a peck of pickled peppers. We'll be right back right after this word from our sponsor. I say, this is John's English Lesson City, the place that lets you have it with no problem. Let him have it with no problem. I got my English lesson with no problem. Thanks for watching. Merci beaucoup por regarder le video. Muchas gracias por ver el video. Muito obrigado por assistir ao video. If you've enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment below. Let him have it. If you'd like to take private online English lessons with me, look in the description box below for a link to my iTalki teacher profile. Hey, that's all. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.